Tony here in the brand new Fired Up for Freedom radio video studio. Hope you're good. We've had a couple of months out where we've got this place ready, but we're ready now, and we're ready for business. I've got a brilliant guest joining me today. He's someone you may have seen speaking at Belfast City Hall. You may have seen him also speaking at the Health and Truth conference a couple of months ago. His name is Jonathan Weissman. I've been wanting to get him on the show for a while. So Jonathan, great to have you here. Thank you very much for joining me.
Many thanks, Tony, for having me. Looking forward to this.
No problem. Now, before we get into your kind of battle against the COVID narrative, I want to just touch on a little bit about your family background, because you've got an interesting history. Tell us about your grandmother and her story.
Sure. Well, my family background is from a Jewish background. So my grandmother, who's 97 at the moment, she's actually not doing too well in terms of her health, but she actually came on the very last train taking Jewish refugees from Nazi-occupied Europe to England. So she left her homeland in Vienna in 1939 and came to London to flee the Nazis. And she actually lost her whole family to the Nazis. So, themes about, government overreach and tyranny are certainly very dear and personal to me based on my family background. Yeah.
Yeah, wow, amazing story. So it's amazing that you're here. I mean, your family was so devastated by the Holocaust and stuff. So it's kind of deep that you're here and you're speaking on these things, and you kind of have a bit of these issues are very close to your heart. Nuremberg and stuff like that is something that means a lot to you, and that's why you can't let things like this just pass, I'm guessing.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's really about having a historical perspective on things where you're not complacent. You don't just think, well, governments exist purely for the betterment of my health and my well-being. You want to independently verify everything you're being told, and every new path that they try to map out for the civilian population. I think it's just any people that have been through something similar would tend to ask the critical questions that maybe I'm asking as well.
Indeed. And tell us just what you do for a living. I think you're involved in like cybersecurity and things like that. Tell us a little bit more of the details, what you do for a living outside of this.
Sure. So my professional work at the moment is in full-time cybersecurity. I have a background also in software development. Now, what's interesting about cybersecurity, which is really about trying to defend against cyber threats to protect the assets of businesses. And what's very interesting is this work is very much related to my current work on what I call biosecurity, or investigating the experimental vaccines. Because essentially, one of the key aspects to my work at the moment is called third-party risk management, which is essentially verifying the risk that a business is exposed to by trusting the software of what we call a third-party provider, so a software vendor. So this is third-party risk management, and I'm quite involved in this area of cybersecurity.
So when it comes to battling the COVID narrative, your interest and research lies mostly in studying the experimental vaccines, and then looking at the ethical, moral, theological, and also political implications of everything that's going on. You get into also issues like informed consent, bodily autonomy, and human health. You did an excellent presentation recently at the Health and Truth conference. It's been seen many times online. I'm going to share the link in the description if anybody wants to watch the full video. But right now, let's have a little look at it.
We've got absolutely can explain this.
We've got a little clip here. So this is you speaking at the Health and Truth conference. We'll just get into it a little second just to give us a flavor.
Adverse reactions. This exosome theory, I cite my risk assessment from Senef and Nye from May 2021, and they called it then. They said this could be exosomes. This shedding is in the monitoring for it is in Pfizer's clinical protocol, and if you go back a few years to the FDA's protocols on gene therapy, it's there as well.
So you were fired up for freedom that day, Jonathan. Your presentation, your risk assessment is incredibly detailed, incredible stuff that you've got into on a depth that is way beyond my pay grade. And for any of the listeners who are not as scientifically minded as you might be, we're going to try and break it down in the kind of simplest ways. Your risk assessment. Tell us why you took this approach, and then let's get into some of your findings.
Well, as far as the risk assessment goes, It's intentionally detailed and it's intentionally broad. So I include 211 AMA academic style references in it across a broad array of specialist scientific areas. One of the things I started to notice when I thought about the problem of what to do and how to decide the best decision to make with these vaccines last summer, I started to realize that most of the people speaking on it have a very narrow perspective on things. Essentially, we have a lot of academics in the government or associated with them or elsewhere, and they only look at one or two little components of the bigger picture. So, for example, we hear a lot about the number of or the levels of antibodies in the serum, which is essentially the blood. And that's essentially what the government strategy is all about. It's, can we prove that when we give out these experimental vaccines, we have lots of antibodies in the blood? What I came to see is that this is a far, far more detailed and complicated problem than just that. My approach has essentially been to go from the micro level down to the individual ingredients or excipients in these experimental vaccines, all the way through to the likely evolutionary pathway that the virus will take over the coming months and years, to try to outline broadly all of the risks from taking these vaccines that we can expect, in order that people might be able to make a proper decision on them.
When you hear someone on the radio say they're safe and effective, what do you think?
I think either ignorant, if they just don't know, or potentially compromised, in the sense that I'd be very interested to know, anyone who says that, is, do they have a vested interest? Is their job tied to their promotion of the so-called vaccines, or are they even directly being paid to market it? And have they disclosed that? So I don't think it's true at all.
You asked the question, how does the vaccine distribute around the body once it's been injected? Very interesting topic. What did you find?
Well, it's very interesting because the MHRA, which is the UK medical regulator, in their public assessment reports, which is essentially what outlines the case for these products to have this temporary use authorization, it's called Regulation 174, they essentially cite general immunologic processes by which vaccines work. And they essentially say, look, this new products is just a vaccine like all the previous stuff. So don't worry about how it distributes. We don't need biodistribution studies which explain how the contents of the vaccine distribute across the body. And there's a problem with that. The problem is these are novel technologies that have never been deployed before at scale. Adenovirus DNA for AstraZeneca, or the mRNA vaccines for Pfizer and Moderna. So the first problem is we absolutely do need to know, because nothing that's gone before has been representative of these experimental vaccines. The second thing is we actually do have access to some of the biodistribution studies. We know from the Pfizer study released by the Japanese medical regulator that the vaccine absolutely does distribute. This was for Pfizer, from the injection site in the shoulder muscle. We know that 16% of it ends up in the liver, 1% in the spleen, and 0.1% in the ovaries of the female rats. And this is all making sense because it drains through the lymph nodes. It goes through what's called the lymphatic system. And then it ends up in the plasma or the bloodstream. And then there was another study that came out in the Journal of Immunology in November last year. And it found that for 4 months following vaccination, the spike protein that's produced is freely circulating in the bloodstream, which is on something called exosomes, which we saw in that clip just there. So these are profound, important studies and important information that has real implications for safety. And what I found is no one's really speaking about that at the level of the government. And I think they should be.
Okay, you got into things that I've heard about before, but I still don't understand it. I don't understand the science. The science is the only thing I failed at GCSE level, so I need a bit of help. The spike protein, what is the danger of having the spike protein moving around the blood?
Sure. Well, the spike protein essentially isn't like inert. It's essentially biologically active. So what it is, there's 4 surface or structural proteins on the outside of the COVID-19 virus. This is the structural protein that's responsible for essentially infecting cells of the body. So we talk about, infection. We're talking about the virus entering cells and then replicating through the cells. The spike protein is the one that attaches to human cells via a receptor called ACE2. And that essentially is the target of the antibodies. You want to try to stop cellular infection, which makes a lot of sense. The problem is we need to know how that spike protein distributes from the vaccine, because as we just said, it can bind to many different cell types. It's not just cells up here in the deltoid, in the shoulder muscle. It can bind to the inner lining of the blood vessels, which are the endothelial cells. It can bind to pericytes, which wrap around your blood vessels, for example, in the heart as well. So the problem is it's the biologically active nature of the spike protein and its ability to attach to cells on the one hand and degrade and also degrade very important, delicate barriers the body has, like the blood-brain barrier, and also the endothelial barrier, which is essentially what moderates the passing of material between the blood and the tissues. So there are many complicated aspects to how the spike protein interacts with the body. And obviously the key aspect to this is how the spike protein distributes following vaccination.
Lots of the different vaccines at one stage or another has been suspended. Use of it has been suspended at one time or another in countries here and there at different times. It's hard to even keep track of it all. But in essence, it was causing enough of a problem in blood clots and things like that, especially in young people. They changed the advice, stopped giving I think it was the AstraZeneca one to under 35s, things like that. So they were aware of the potential issues. Do you think that kind of that risk was accurately relayed to the public?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, if you go back, and I cite this in my risk assessment, studies that were done way before COVID-19, so before 2020, warning about how difficult it would be to create a coronavirus vaccine for human use. And early studies, around May 2020 or even earlier, about be very careful if you target the spike protein, especially if you're going to produce it. So when you think about the disease progression of a severe case of COVID-19, you have sort of a dysregulated immune response, which is the sort of what we call the cytokine storm. Okay, so you have immunosuppressants that are often given out, sometimes strong, powerful steroids and things like that. But the second thing you have, which can characterize a very extreme case of COVID-19, is the thrombotic events. And I would say that's largely due to the spike protein. So this is when people take things like blood thinners, for example, to try to guard against it. And I actually cite this in my risk assessment. There's very much a similarity between a case of COVID-19 and an adverse reaction from the vaccine. I think the two things are very much related because essentially you're being exposed to the pathogenic protein from the virus.
It's still so over my head, but I'm glad that someone like yourself, Jonathan, is looking into it, and it just kind of blows my mind how we can have so much of so many highly paid medical professionals constantly doing the rounds on the BBC, but they would never enter into any of this sort of area of discussion or debate. I don't think you've been on the BBC. You certainly should have. Why do you think that people don't want to hear from you and hear from this sort of stuff, or from me either, for that? But why do they want to hide this stuff? Why can't they be open about the risks?
Well, maybe there was an opportunity some time ago to really, have the debate. But more recently, I feel like we've been so committed as a society, as a country, as a people, to just going down this path headlong, regardless. A lot's been invested at this point. You hear about the stories, people say, well, I wasn't there for this funeral, or I couldn't attend a wedding, or I couldn't do this or do that. People have essentially invested a lot. They've lost a lot. They've lost businesses. they've lost key family moments, they've lost the last moments with their families, and they've been led to believe that all of this sacrifice has been for a good cause, altruistic. The question I would have is, are we being psychologically manipulated into a path that's destructive, which is a horrible thought. But I think that's what's happening. I think there's a lot of groupthink, in the government. I don't think every single person involved at every level is necessarily part of some overarching conspiracy. You don't really need that. You just need a few things wrong in the system at the very, very top and a lot of compliant people. So I think there's a psychological aspect.
Definitely, and there's a lot of behavioral scientists and psychologists and stuff working on SAGE and things like that. I've heard it's called mass formation psychosis, and partly a lot of people are suffering that. Groupthink.
Exactly. Yeah, I was actually thinking the very same thing, and I think that's essentially what is characterizing the current time. I think because it's public health, because it involves severe disease potentially and fatalities, people are less prone to stand up and say this is wrong, like with regards to the experimental vaccines, because nobody wants to have responsibility for somebody succumbing to a viral infection, let's just say. And this is one of the pressures that someone like me would face, because what I'm doing is speaking out on documented risks. There's nothing I'm doing that's like against human health or is coercive or anything. But the accusation would come, well, Jonathan, if people listen to you, they may not take something that will save their life. To that, I would simply say, if this thing is so good, it should be able to stand up under scrutiny of public debate. And if it can't, then there's something wrong with it.
Yeah, exactly. What I kind of take from it, my kind of approach is that I understand that this is a high-tech experimental biotechnology approach to this problem, which in some people can argue, okay, that's the future of science. We've moved on from the old ways. This is the new way of doing it. This is progress. But the way I look at it is that it is experimental. It is high technology. It's new technology. It's advanced technology. It's never been rolled out on a mass scale before, which is a major problem for me. And even the companies are biotechnology companies. The industry is the biotech industry, the body technology industry. This is putting essentially software and things that will need to be updated. It's almost programming humans. Okay, they're trying to say it's programming humans to stop them catching the COVID, but it is a whole new world here of a mixture of technology and humanity, which doesn't sit well with me. And I'm happy eating oranges and getting vitamin C and going outside and trying to get out in the sunshine when I can. For me, that's a more safer approach when I do a risk assessment, just in my simple mind. But you've taken it to the next level, and you've got issues as well. So it kind of makes me feel glad that I haven't bought into any of the whole COVID nonsense I give them their 3 weeks. I'll be honest. I give them their 3 weeks, and that was it. And I'm glad I've made that decision. And I'm glad I haven't succumbed to the peer pressure and all that. It's quite incredible, the coercion and stuff going on, and the different incentives all around the world, and what you can and can't do based on whether or not you've taken this experimental shot. It's incredible for me to watch. You ask a couple of questions in your risk assessment. Are the vaccines inducing immunological, if I've said that right, memory to protect against future variants? What did you find when you asked that question? What was the conclusion?
Well, the first thing is there's absolutely no evidence that the antibody response that a vaccinated person acquires through vaccination will be beneficial and protective in the future. Now, look, if we look at the situation right now with the circulating variant, we already have a situation where essentially these antibodies cannot stop cellular infection. This is why you see very high case rates amongst the vaccinated people. And to that, I would point to recent data from the UK Health Security Agency and from Public Health Scotland, suggesting case rates perhaps even in excess of the unvaccinated in certain age demographics. So the first thing is the antibodies, which I remember asked to stop the cells being infected, to stop the progression of the virus through the body. That's neutralization has already gone, right? However, there's another step beyond that, which could be even more problematic, and it's called antibody-dependent enhancement, also known as pathogenic priming. And this is the problem where if you strongly train your immune response through vaccination to essentially an outdated spike protein, which is what we've done. We've encoded against the original strain from Wuhan, January 2020 from China. Well, and what we're doing each time a person is exposed to COVID-19 after vaccination, they're recalling. It's the theory of vaccination. You're recalling the initial training that you had. But that may lead to increased infection of the innate immune cells or the white blood cells. Potentially, there's been some examples and some worrying evidence recently in the lab on ADE, antibody-dependent enhancement. What may happen? Now, this is just a conjecture, Tony, so I can't prove it, but there's some reasons to be worried. I spoke about before the spike protein attaching to sort of indiscriminately to many cells in the body through a receptor, which is essentially a domain that facilitates the virus infecting the cell. It's called ACE2. So you've got the spike binding to ACE2. But as this virus and as this spike protein mutates in the wild, as the variants change, it may be that there's so much evolutionary pressure that the virus starts to infect your innate immune cells through something called the Fc gamma receptor. And that could lead to a lot more problems. And this has been observed before, for example, in dengue fever. So a big concern is whether these antibodies that we're producing through vaccination will not only be useless, which they mostly are right now, but pathogenic.
And that is, I'm presuming, getting into other variants. This variant thing can continue indefinitely because the variants are being almost driven by the vaccination in the middle of the pandemic. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, Professor Luc Montagnier, HIV co-discoverer, Nobel Prize winner, he said the same thing a long time ago. This is the same argument Dr. Geert van den Bosch has been making for a long, long time. I independently verified the argument. I mean, these guys are the experts, don't get me wrong, but I wanted to go into the literature before 2020 and make sure I could see it for myself. Everything they're saying is right there in the literature. It's quasi-species theory. It's the theory of using an imperfect, leaky vaccine in the middle of high levels of infection and transmission. It's the worst thing you could do. This is absolutely known prior to COVID-19. It's a terrible mistake.
One of the other questions you ask is, by 2023, will we judge universal vaccination to be wise in hindsight? We're already into 2022. It was 2021 when you wrote that. And it almost already seems that you can almost smell it in the air. The U-turns are extraordinary. It feels like the last week or so has been a very a noticeable sea change in tone from where we were a few weeks before that. I'm not altogether comfortable as to why they've done a U-turn, but I'm not complaining in the fact that hopefully we can go out and enjoy a restaurant again sometime soon, because it's been a while for me, and I do like a feed. But how do you think we're going to judge this the idea of universal vaccination? Do you think in the coming months that soon the penny might drop and all these things that you've been saying might be actually on the news and it'll be a big crisis?
It's an interesting question. I think on the one hand, it's a possibility. If there is, sadly, the dominating variant that causes more disease noticeably amongst vaccinated people, I think at that point, it would be kind of undeniable that something's gone wrong with this universal vaccination campaign. If that doesn't happen, and I don't want that to happen, then what we will see, I believe, is simply an increase in the medium-term and long-term adverse reactions coming to the fore. Because remember, what we're seeing with myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle, or anaphylactics, which is a severe allergic reaction to an ingredient in the vaccine, these kind of issues, which get a lot of publicity, and they can be, and they are very, very serious, but they really represent the short-term adverse reactions. And even then, the government are rather not so prepared to associate them with the vaccine, or not as strongly as people like me would like them to. I think what we will see, sadly, is I think you will see more perhaps autoimmunity or cancer, and there are some reasons for being worried about that, especially if people keep receiving more and more doses. So essentially what I would say is, by 2023, I think you'll see more morbidity and disease in the general population than what we are used to seeing. Now, the government will probably claim this is the effects of long-term COVID. And to be fair, there may be some aspect to that, right? As I've already discussed, COVID-19 and the vaccine, there's some similarities there because it's the same pathogenic viral protein. And I think at that point, we may see a population that become more fearful and perhaps more dependent on government because the health of the population is starting to suffer. I hope it doesn't get to that. But if we keep taking boosters and if we keep injecting everyone, even people who don't want it, I think we will see an increase in these kind of problems.
Yeah, let's certainly hope not. But I'm already kind of starting to hear things like that. Doctors and stuff coming forward saying that they're seeing an incredible amount of strokes and heart attacks and an unusual amount of deaths. So I really hope we don't see that. Unfortunately, I do agree. It's certainly a possibility. The link for your presentation is going to be in the description. If everybody wants to get in to watch the whole thing, you can watch it on YouTube, and we'll share the link below. You can see it there. It's a really good presentation. And I'm really grateful that you did that, Jonathan. It's really essential to have all of this work out there in the open. I want to discuss a couple of other things with you. I've really enjoyed your speeches at Belfast City Hall. We've been going down every 2 weeks for ages now, and I've seen some great crowds. How encouraged are you by the resistance to all of this?
Well, it's I can honestly say it's just a privilege and it's a beautiful sight. I said to Sean Snow, the organizer, once I walked up the steps and I was on the platform and everyone just looked so good, just colorful, bright. The signs are brilliant. The banter's great. The unity, and we talk about that here in Northern Ireland, is just a beautiful thing to behold. We're all coming together for a single cause. It's very encouraging for me. I love meeting everybody. I love the atmosphere. And I think you're seeing now a little bit of momentum behind us. We know about the mask situation, that we got that set aside. That was they were trying to get rid of the exemption that was unqualified because it causes severe disease and distress. That was a pretty big thing. We all kind of held the line on that. We said, look, we're not going to obey it. We're not going to listen to it. We're just going to keep on. And they dropped it very quietly, but they did drop it. And now we see with the vaccine passport movement there as well. So I think it's a good time for the movement. We've got lots to be encouraged by, but let's not be complacent either.
Yeah, it has been a quite spectacular U-turn. We're still only a couple of weeks into January, and all this stuff is kind of meant to be just kicking in, and already they're kind of reversing it. Well, it's great to see, but like you said, there's still a lot of things there that we need to fight for. Do you think that, just in a nutshell, that the whole idea of these vaccine passports was literally just a ploy to get people who were reluctant or hesitant on vaccines to actually just sign up for it? Do you think it's literally just a tool of coercion? They knew it was going to destroy the businesses. They only gave it a month and they've turned it back again. Do you think it was a part of that, or do you think they wanted it for the long haul and they were just shocked at the response, especially hospitality, the sort of figures that they've been quoting? I mean, they're going to lose all the restaurants and stuff if they didn't reverse this pronto.
I think it certainly, in part, is a tool of coercion, just like previous measures that they've been putting out to try to pressurize the population through essentially psychological operations. The second aspect, though, I guess, which is potentially even more significant, is the idea that it's linked to some kind of digital identity, and it's linked essentially to taking the population and saying, right, now you need to go and prove who you are to enter any kind of establishment, and we're going to track you. I mean, I'm not really an expert on that topic, but at the same time, I'm listening to everyone and all the research and everything going on from the World Economic Forum down. I think that's something which they're not going to give up easily. So hence why I'm not complacent. It's like, I'm glad because I don't want to see anybody getting jabbed who doesn't want it, who's made their mind up. And that's something I'm very passionate about, is coercion has no place back down to the Nuremberg Code and ever since with medical procedures, let alone what this is, a medical experiment. Could it be something even more audacious? I think it could be. Why are they then rowing back? I'm not sure. I'm not complacent.
My final question to you, Jonathan, is the most important one, in my opinion. It's the direction I want to think about a lot. What's the solution?
Well, it's a hard question, but at the same time, look, the most immediate thing we can control is our voice, is speaking up. We have to implore everybody who has an opportunity, who has a voice, who has expertise, to speak up now. So if you're not sure what you can do, come to a protest, post on social media, if you have any kind of standing, if you have anything that you can tap into, look, I'm not from the medical world. I'm not from the government. I'm not from the pharmaceuticals. So essentially, I'm coming from the outside. What did I do? Just did what I could do. Just did my research. Make a little channel on YouTube. Just make a video, share it on your social media. So speak as loudly as you can, and then keep looking for strategic points of pressure to put on here in Northern Ireland, on your MLA, your MPs, on safeguarding officers. Keep putting the pressure on, keep speaking the truth, and keep undermining the narrative. I said it on one of the speeches. I said, until this thing with the masks is gone and the vaccine passport, we will always openly and publicly ridicule the state. So it's realizing the stakes and where they're at. It doesn't matter if somebody thinks, oh, Jonathan's crazy or Jonathan's too intense. It's like, no, we need to all take this very, very seriously until the Coronavirus Act is gone and it's history and it's consigned to the dustbin of history, frankly. That's what I would say. It's take it very, very seriously individually and implore others. I speak to people behind the scenes who are concerned, but they're not speaking out because they've made their own decision and feel that there's still time. And I say to them, well, I did my analysis in the summer and I came to a different conclusion. So I would say to bear that in mind as well.
Yeah, really, really good advice. Your website is alltherisks.com. Jonathan, it's been great talking to you today here at Fired Up for Freedom, and hopefully see you very soon, maybe at outside City Hall again one of these Saturdays, 2:00.
Looking forward to it, Tony. Brilliant.
Thanks a lot, mate. Good to chat to you. Speak to you soon, mate.
Thanks for having me.